Yo, Broncos country, let's ride, baby.
Broncos country, let's ride. Broncos country, let's ride. Broncos country, let's ride. Broncos country, let's ride.
Mr. Unlimited. Yeah, you gotta be unlimited. You gotta have a thought process of being unlimited.
I think the most important thing that we can do is learn from it. It's been a journey all season, right? We started behind the 8 ball a little bit. We've done well over the past several games, and unfortunately didn't go away tonight. But we're going to respond the right way. That's what we're going to do.
Alright, so I am back, and unfortunately last night we had some of the craziest news of the entire NFL season. The Denver Broncos are reportedly going to be cutting Russell Wilson in a move that basically came just a few hours after they decided to bench him for their last 2 weeks of the NFL season. Now, when the news broke that they were actually benching Russell Wilson, I didn't really think too much of it. I know some people were covering it, basically saying that he was going to get traded and whatnot, but I didn't really believe any of that until the news broke at 11 o'clock Central Time last night, when I found out that they were actually going to be trying to cut him. And I have a lot of feelings and opinions for both the Denver Broncos perspective, but also Russell Wilson's perspective, so let's just kind of hop right into it. For starters, let's just talk about the general money. If Russell Wilson is cut before June 1st, there's going to be a cap hit dead money of $85 million. Now, I don't want to sit here and pretend like I know everything about the cap space, but I can tell you right now, $85 million is a shit ton of money. And if that is going to be the case, I guarantee you for this team to make the salary cap number threshold, they're going to have to cut several veterans or potentially make a ton of trades this offseason. So guys like Jerry Jeudy, Patrick Surtain, Courtland Sutton, so on and so forth, their jobs as a Denver Bronco might be on the line. Now, if Sean Payton and the Broncos want to be patient and wait till a post-June 1st cut, that would mean it would be separated into 2 separate bills. The first one coming in 2024 with a total of $35.4 million, and the second one coming in 2025 with a total of $49.6 million, of course adding up to the total of $85 million. So if Denver wants to go ahead and get rid of the money essentially right now and just kind of focus in on 2025 and 2026, they're probably going to end up choosing the $85 million dead money in the first season. But if Denver does decide they want to keep a lot of their guys they currently have and just kind of make a couple restructured deals, they might go for that post-June 1st cut then. As for what I would do, I would probably just take the $85 million cap hit this year and just kind of focus in on 2025 and 2026. At the end of the day, if you do decide to do that post-June 1st cut, you're just kind of delaying the inevitable. And if I'm Sean Payton, I really don't have the time nor the patience to just be sitting around waiting to be bad for the next couple years. Whereas if you do just decide to take the $85 million cap hit this year, you're probably going to be bad next year and you're probably going to lose a lot of games because you don't have the veterans that you're used to. But so what, you're going to probably be developing a bunch of young guys. Which then brings me to all the possibilities as to what the Denver Broncos are thinking with the quarterback position. I have 3 different possibilities, and I think the first 2 are probably the more realistic ones, and if anything, probably the first one is the only real option. I think the second one's a little unrealistic, but I am going to present the option. My first option for this team, and I think it's going to be the most obvious one, is that they're kind of going to go all in on a young quarterback this year and trade away a lot of the veterans to go for a full-blown rebuild. As it sits right now, their first round pick this year is currently sitting at the number 14 spot, and if that spot holds true, they're more than likely going to be missing out on a lot of the top quarterbacks, mainly guys like JJ McCarthy, Drake May, and Caleb Williams. But that is totally fine because this is such a loaded draft class in terms of quarterbacks that you can go out there and get a Jaden Daniels, a Bo Nix, or a Michael Penix Jr., or who knows, maybe JJ McCarthy does fall to you guys. I think for Sean Payton's system, I think Michael Penix Jr. makes a ton of sense. But yet again, I could also see him going for a guy like JJ McCarthy or a Bo Nix because I think those guys make sense as well. I think Denver wants to go out there and find a strong-arm quarterback who's willing to take hits in the pocket and is a little bit of a gunslinger mentality. You're looking for somebody who's similar to Drew Brees, but not really similar to what you got in Russell Wilson. And I think if they do that, they're going to be able to get a ton of value from a lot of the veterans they currently have on the roster. If they do decide to trade Patrick Surtain, I guarantee you they're at least going to get at least 1 first-round pick this year, which could potentially go into a potential receiver, offensive lineman, defensive lineman, so on and so forth. And if you throw in some guys like Courtland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, you're probably going to be able to get 2nd, 3rd, maybe even another first-round pick from somebody else. And if that is the case, you can basically go all in on this really loaded draft class and have a really nice draft class to move forward with for the future of Sean Payton and his time with the Denver Broncos. I think this is the most realistic spot for them to go down, but I do think there's a second possibility that I think could happen, but I just don't know how the cap space would work out. And that would be that they would take a strategic approach to trading and cutting certain veterans to go out there and get Kirk Cousins. Now, I think the only way this does happen is if they do decide to do that post-June 1st cut, because ultimately, I just don't see how they're going to have the money for him if they decide to take the $85 million cap hit. And even with that post-June 1st cut, they're still going to have to make up, I believe, like $50 million somehow by cutting certain players. But with Kirk Cousins coming off a pretty bad injury, I wouldn't be surprised if his stock value right now is kind of low. And if Denver can somehow make up enough money, I wouldn't be surprised if they went out there and tried to get him. I think Kirk Cousins could elevate this roster to be a pretty good roster. And I think if you strategically cut certain players and are able to keep guys like Courtland Sutton, Patrick Surtain, and kind of keep the identity of your team, I think Kirk Cousins could come in and be pretty solid for you guys. Now, is this a genuine possibility? Probably not. I'd give it like a 1% chance of happening, but if it is going to happen with a veteran quarterback, I would expect it to be Kirk Cousins. This is more than likely going to happen if Sean Payton yet again decides that he doesn't want to sit for a full rebuild and wants to win now. Which I do think is partially the reason why he decided to come back to coach, because he thought he could win with Russell Wilson. Well, that didn't work. Now you move on to Kirk Cousins and you kind of build your roster around him. It's not like you have to trade for Kirk Cousins, so ultimately you're still going to have your draft picks, and if you do trade a guy like a Jerry Jeudy, you might be able to get up another second or third round pick just from him. So you can get young pieces to surround a guy like Kirk Cousins and build a pretty solid roster around him to win games and potentially contend for championships. So again, pretty unrealistic, but I just want to throw that one out there. The last possibility, and this one's probably going to go down the route of if it is a post-June 1st cut, is that they're going to really just be shit for the next 2 years and maybe just go all in with Jarrett Stidham, or even if they decide to go for a quarterback, it might not be with their first round pick, and go all in on 2026 with the young developing talent that you do have. Hypothetically speaking, you can maybe get a guy like Jordan Travis in the 3rd or 4th round of the NFL draft, developing the young guys that you do already have on your roster. Maybe you go out there and get a Nate Wiggins or a Jared Verse, and then in 2026, after all the dead money stops coming in, you can go all in on free agency to build a roster around Jordan Travis and his development. And in essence, you're basically going to be tanking for higher draft picks. You're kind of taking the Philadelphia 76ers route, which I do think is a potential possibility for Denver. I would personally say this is the best idea for a team like the New Orleans Saints, but for Denver Broncos, I think it makes sense as well. But with that being said, similar to what I was just saying for option number 2, Sean Payton probably wants to win. I seriously doubt that he wants to be a bad team for the next 2 years. This is a Super Bowl winning head coach that wants to compete now, and I just don't see this potentially being a real possibility. Again, I think this has a less than 1% chance of actually happening. But those are kind of the 3 options. I think of the 3 options, the most realistic one is going to be option number 1, which is of course the young quarterback in the 1st round. But now let's go ahead and shift gears and start talking about Russell Wilson and what the future lies for him. Again, as I said earlier, I really did not expect him to leave the Denver Broncos because I didn't expect the Denver Broncos to be willing to take on so much dead money. And I think Russell Wilson has been pretty solid this year. Like, listen, he's not a top 10 quarterback, but I do think he's within the realm of being a top 15 guy. He's arguably had better stats than some of the best quarterbacks in the entire NFL this year, and I think that partially is a little bit because of the system that Sean Payton has built around him. But I also think we have to give a little bit of credit to Russell Wilson for adapting to a new scheme and adjusting his game to fit the team's needs. But with that being said, I have 5 different teams who might be willing to go out there and pick him up. The 5th team is the Seattle Seahawks. Now, I think this is super unrealistic, and kind of going back to what I've been saying, I think this has a 1% chance of happening. This would be a move that would happen if Geno Smith does not want to be the future quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks. I think it would have to be kind of agreed upon between Pete Carroll, Geno Smith, and Russell Wilson. I think if this does happen, obviously Geno Smith and Drew Lock are not going to be your starters next year, and you're going to move forward with Russell Wilson. Should Seattle do this? No, I don't think they should do this. I think Geno Smith is a good enough quarterback, but I also think they should go out there and get a quarterback in this year's draft to develop behind Geno Smith for at least 1 or 2 years. I think bringing Russell Wilson in not only brings in a little bit of drama, but it also brings in a little bit of uncertainty with the quarterback position regarding the future. Like, I do think that Russell Wilson can go back into the system and be just as good as he was all the way back in like 2018, for example, but I just don't know if right now the Seattle Seahawks team necessarily needs that right now. If it was up to me, I would stick to Geno Smith and kind of do what I said earlier, take a young quarterback and develop him behind Geno and just kind of move on from the Russell Wilson years. I understand Pete Carroll is a little bit older and might want to go back to winning championships, so I guess if they decided to do that, they might go down the Russell Wilson route, but I just don't see that happening. The next team is the Washington Commanders, and again, I just don't think this one's going to happen either. I do think Washington will probably take a young quarterback in this year's draft. But this is kind of already an established roster, so if they do decide they want to go out there and win championships now, I guess Russell Wilson might be the best option. But with that being said, you'd still be the 3rd worst quarterback within your division. You still have Dak, you still have Jalen, and hell, Daniel Jones might be back next year. So if that is the case, is Russell Wilson legitimately good enough to carry a Washington team to a championship? No way. Could he carry them to the playoffs? Maybe, I don't know. Like, Washington has some good pieces. They have a decent defense with the kind of shaky defensive line. They have some good pieces on the offense with a very shaky offensive line. And I just don't know if Russell Wilson would be attracted to a team that could potentially get him killed because their offensive line isn't very good. This is also a Washington team that already has their quarterback in Sam Howell, who I don't necessarily know is going to be their franchise guy, but at the bare minimum, he is going to be the starter moving forward unless they do take a 1st first-round quarterback. So again, this one is unrealistic, but if they do get a head coach who wants to win now and wants a veteran quarterback to lead this team, I guess Russell Wilson could be your guy. The third possibility, and I think this is when we start getting into real contenders, is going to be the Atlanta Falcons. Atlanta is obviously a team that has a very good defense, some very good weapons, some good running backs, a good offensive line. They just kind of need their head coach and quarterback. And I think for this team, kind of going back to what I was saying with Washington, I think it all kind of depends on what the head coach wants. If the head coach wants to go out there and get a young development quarterback who can develop around the guys they already have around him, then I think that makes a ton of sense. If they want to go after a veteran quarterback like a Justin Fields, a Kirk Cousins, or a Russell Wilson, I do think that is a real possibility as well. My only issue with Russell Wilson going to Atlanta is I just don't really know if that's much of a personnel and schematic fit right now. Again, it all depends on what the head coach decides to do with the scheme and where they go from there, and whether or not Russell Wilson fits their scheme. But I just couldn't really imagine seeing Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and Bijan playing with Russell Wilson. I just don't really know if that's that great of a fit. But what I will say about that is if that Atlanta does want to win games next year, I do think they should go for a veteran quarterback instead of a developmental piece. And I do think that Russell Wilson is probably your second best option behind Kirk Cousins for a win now quarterback. So I guess that's probably your first realistic option. The second most realistic option is going to be the Las Vegas Raiders. And I think the one reason why I have them so high up on my list is because Antonio Pierce is probably going to have a very short leash next year. I do imagine the Raiders will sign him to be their head coach, and I imagine it might only be a 1, maybe 2, maybe 3-year deal. And I think if the Raiders struggle to make the playoffs or really have a bad season next year, given the talent that's already on this roster, I wouldn't be shocked if he gets cut for a more experienced head coach. Now, I am personally a Raiders fan, and I really want to see Pierce work out there, so I would understand if they wanted to go out there and get a veteran quarterback. I know they already have Jimmy Garoppolo, and I know they already have Aiden O'Connell, but let's be honest, neither of those guys are really it. In fact, I really would not be surprised if they do decide to just cut ties with Jimmy Garoppolo this offseason. So if they can somehow make the cap space situation work out, I do think the Raiders might be in a prime position to go out there and get a Russell Wilson to lead this team. This is already a team that has some decent defensive pieces that are starting to click at the right time. And offensively speaking, I think Russell Wilson would be pretty happy with what's already there. You already have Devontae Adams, you already have Jacoby Myers, you have a decent offensive line and some good running backs. I think for Russ, it might just be a situation where you have to question whether or not you are a schematic fit. But based off the fact that the Raiders are having success with Aiden O'Connell, in my opinion, I think that Russell Wilson is a clear upgrade, so I do think that is a real possibility. Now, if that does happen, that could be very interesting because the Raiders are obviously in the same division as the Denver Broncos. So maybe if there is a little bit of spite from Russell Wilson's part, then the Raiders could be an attractive destination for him. But the number one most attractive destination for Russell Wilson, at least in my opinion, is going to be the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I think the main reason why is because this team already has a dominant defense, it already has some good weapons, some good running backs, it needs some work on the offensive line, but it's still not a bad unit, and of course there is stability with the coaching staff. Sure, they're going to have to go out there and get a brand new offensive coordinator, but that might attract Russell Wilson even more. Let's say hypothetically this Steelers team goes out there and gets Russell Wilson and gets an offensive coordinator who knows how to use Russell Wilson effectively, then I think Russell Wilson might be inclined to come to the Steelers team to make it work over there. The only real question I do have for this roster is going to be if it is a cultural fit. Obviously, as of late, the Steelers are kind of going through a bit of scrutiny regarding their culture and whether or not certain players fit the culture. And with Russell Wilson's time in Denver and kind of the end of Seattle, there was a lot of questions regarding his culture and whether or not he was a fit with those teams. So I do have to question whether or not he is an actual fit with a culture like the Pittsburgh Steelers. But if the culture does check out, then I do think the personnel checks out as well, and I do think that schematically it checks out as well. So with that all being said, I do think the Steelers is the first real possibility, and I do think it is a good shot for Russell Wilson to be a Pittsburgh Steeler at some point. I know Kenny Pickett is there, but let's be honest, Russell Wilson is 3 times what Kenny Pickett is. But with that all being said, it has been a very interesting time for the Denver Broncos with Russell Wilson, from so much hope and so much glamour to all of a sudden just kind of collapsing on its own head. It feels like just yesterday we were watching memes of the Denver Broncos watching Russell Wilson film on draft day, and here we are less than 2 years later and now they're reportedly going to be cutting him. It just shows you how the times can change in the NFL so fast. But NFL and Denver Broncos fans, let me know in the comment section below what you guys think Russell Wilson is going to do, and also let me know what you guys think the Denver Broncos are going to do. Again, to kind of recap what I'm saying, I do think that Denver's going to go for a young quarterback, and I do think Russell Wilson will end up being a Pittsburgh Steeler. So if you do agree, let me know in the comment section below. And if you did enjoy the video, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button because that helps me a ton. But let's say it one more time, Broncos country, let's ride.